Hello, my name is Dion Dobrzynski. My research is about the way forests are imagined in fantasy fiction, and you might be asking, why on earth do I do this? Well, it's because forests are fantastic, and because now more than ever, we need to imagine better ways of living with them. I'm delighted to be able to share what I've discovered through my research. I've always been interested in how the arts and sciences can collaborate to think creatively about some of the challenges we as a society and culture face. Perhaps the biggest, most urgent and most complex is the climate and biodiversity crises. Both issues interrelated and both worsened by deforestation. These are ecological issues, yes, but they are also social, economic, political, and cultural issues. In other words, they are by their very nature interdisciplinary. That is, they relate to many subjects or branches on the tree of knowledge. I argue that we need the arts and humanities working together with the sciences, not only to understand these problems, but to help stimulate the collective change required in order to tackle them. My research is focused on three of the most influential authors in modern fantasy: William Morris, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Ursula K. Le Guin, whose fiction seen together spans from the late 19th century to the early 21st, a period that has seen immense literary but also social and environmental changes. Why are fantasy forests important today? Well, I argue that they explore the past and the future as a way to understand and indeed challenge our present relationship with forests. In doing so, fantasy envisions alternative ways of perceiving, valuing, and living with forests. Given that fantasy has a global popularity and interest, there's a really exciting opportunity to discover how these fantasy forests might be used in such a way to engage people on a cognitive or intellectual level, but also on a deeply emotional and ethical level too, to the real forests upon which we all, of course, depend. That is why I began taking a group of undergraduate students to an area of ancient oak woodland called Ruskin Land in the Wyre Forest National Nature Reserve, to explore how these texts might be used as a form of environmental engagement. Ruskin Land is named after the Victorian writer and social critic John Ruskin, who, in the 1870s, sought to take a piece of land, beautiful, peaceful, and fruitful, and create an alternative, more sustainable way of life in the forest there. Over the course of 3 workshops, I wanted to create a space to allow the fictional forest to meld imaginatively with the real forest around us. I wanted to discover what happened when we let the textual and the actual forest overlap and interact. In each workshop, I led the group of students out into the forest on what I call reading walks, where I'd read descriptions of forests from fantasy fiction in situ. Occasionally, we'd sit inside the aptly named Dragon's Nest, This is a beautiful sculpture made by architecture students from reclaimed deadwood on the forest floor. I chose the extracts carefully so that there would be a reference point that would bridge across the fictional and the real forest. This could be a particular plant, or an animal, or insect, or what some of the students described as the feel or tone of the landscape, or the soundscape around us, such as the burbling and tinkling of a stream. One of the most fascinating ways in which fantasy forests affected the students is by defamiliarizing their surroundings, allowing them to look at ordinary or often overlooked things like moss at their feet with renewed attention and a sense of wonder. In one of the extracts from Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, the hobbit, Frodo, is led blindfolded by the elves as they lead him into the secret realm in the forest of Lothlorien. When his blindfold is removed, he is astonished by what he sees, mesmerized by the beauty around him. I encourage the students in the workshop to enter into this perceptive state of wonder when I read the extract to them. Then I got them to blindfold each other on a short section of the walk. I also used mirrors, which the students would walk along with, holding it under their nose, so all they could see in front of them is the canopy above, or a crystal ball reflecting the forest into the palm of their hand. I think imaginary forests can be used in similar ways, almost like a perceptual tool to make us look at real forests from a different angle or perspective and realize how complex and wonderful these ecosystems are. I use sound equipment to record the students' immediate responses to the extracts and to their surroundings on the walks, which were tracked to create GPS maps. I also recorded their conversations as a group at the end of each day. Each participant had a journal they could write or sketch in, recording their observations or impressions throughout the day. This allowed me to collect a range of lots of different types of information, which together helped me understand how these texts were shaping the students' experience of the forest. After lunch, they would all take part in an activity related to the forest, such as pressing apples from the orchard there, going on a species identification walk with a local naturalist, making artist's charcoal from willow wands, and here are some photographs showing the process. Then the students would sit down, reflect on their experience, and paint or draw. Some of the pieces, like the one you can see here, were made using the charcoal they had just created in the forest. I'm pleased to say that the results have shown me that fantasy forests have enormous potential in helping us think creatively about forest ecology, sharpening our sensory perception of our surroundings, enriching our imagination, and stimulating a sense of wonder and emotional connection to the enchanting reality of these forest ecosystems. So, let's venture into some of these fantasy forests I've been working with in the workshop. The most obvious place to start will be Fangorn Forest, the ancient forest home of the Ents, those walking, talking, tree-like creatures I'm sure many of you are familiar with in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. When the hobbits, Merry and Pippin, first encounter the oldest Ent, Treebeard, the thing that most strikes them are his eyes. Those deep eyes were surveying them, slow and solemn, but very penetrating. They were brown, shot through with green light. Later, Merry recalls that one felt as if there was an enormous well behind them, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking. But their surface was sparkling with the present, like the sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep, you might say, or just feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years. Rooted in the memory of a deep past, the Ent nevertheless retains a perceptive awareness of the present. His consciousness seems embodied in a tree's physiology or physical structure, which provides a metaphor for the way he seems to exist, both in a human or hobbit scale of time, but also a scale of time much larger than our own, extending from the root tip of the deep past to the leaf tip of a perpetually unfurling present. Although Treebeard's motto is "Don't be hasty," the hobbits convince the Ent Treebeard to rally the other Ents in the forest to attack Saruman, a wizard who has been carelessly deforesting their home. In so doing, the Ents become a vital ally in a much wider fight to save the world from ecological devastation, much as our own forests are in tackling the climate and biodiversity crises. Perhaps we can learn a great deal from Treebeard, who is able to think deeply on a scale of time much larger than a human lifespan, but is also able to act decisively and effectively in an emergency situation. Here at Byfor there is a project ongoing called Membra that's exploring the so-called memory of trees, how environmental stresses can imprint a kind of memory on their genes, which may allow them to adapt quickly to rapid environmental change. Perhaps Treebeard's memory of past deforestation in Middle-earth and the existential danger this has posed allows him to respond effectively to present threats. Tolkien was influenced by a writer called William Morris. This is a name you might recognise in connection with floral wallpapers, like the one you can see in front of you now. As well as leading the arts and crafts movement in the late 19th century, Morris was also a social critic, challenging industrial capitalism and the devastating effects this was having on the natural environment and working people. It has also been argued that he wrote some of the first fantasy novels, with titles such as The Wood Beyond the World, The Well at the World's End, and The Water at the Wondrous Isles. But it is his novel News from Nowhere that I want to talk to you about in connection with the theme of time. For it's Morris's utopian or ideal vision of a sustainable society in which he takes the London of the late 19th century that he knew, and he imagines what it might look like 200 years into the future, that is, in the year 2090. It's fascinating that this future London is covered in trees and forests which are biodiverse, managed sustainably, and valued enormously by the people who live there. It's important to remember that in writing the book, Morris was responding to contemporary societal and environmental trends, many of which, urbanisation, deforestation, overconsumption, pollution, and the rise of a fossil fuel economy, precipitated the now global ecological crises of the 21st century. Today, we can approach the book not only as a way to understand environmental history, but also as a model of a sustainable urban forest for the 21st, when we are discovering how essential trees are in our towns and cities, where most of the world's population now live for the first time in human history. Trees are important in our cities not only to combat biodiversity decline and sequester carbon, but to improve people's lives through mental and physical health benefits that trees provide. Morris's fantasy forest is a space in which we can think creatively about how we might reimagine our cities for a more sustainable future. Finally, I want to tell you about a book written by the American science fiction and fantasy author Ursula K. Le Guin. The book is called The Word for World is Forest, and it was written in 1972. This was a time in which ecological concerns were entering into cultural consciousness as never before. The novel imagines an alien forested planet, Afshi, which is long ago populated with a separate species of human who have evolved to live sustainably with their forest home. The novel opens when humans from a now ecologically devastated Earth, called Terrans, travel to Afshi and begin deforesting the planet, enslaving or killing the indigenous Afshians in ways that are tragically reminiscent of historic and recent genocides of forest-dwelling indigenous peoples around the world. Le Guin does not offer comfort from the uncertainty of a future imperilled by these social and ecological crises. Perhaps the purpose of fantasy is not to promise impossibilities, but to expand our expectations of the possible. There is hope in the novel, in the halt to deforestation and colonisation, but it's a hope that's conditional rather than assured, dependent rather than determined. The clear-felled area of forest shows promising signs of what scientists call ecological succession, in which rotted stumps give way to fiberweed, under whose hirsute leaves the seedling shrubs got their first growth, the sumacs, dwarf aspens and salviforms which, grown, would in turn protect the seedling trees. Left alone, this area might reforest itself within 30 years and retain the full climax forest within 100. Left alone. These ecological processes that are already underway could give hope to our own heavily deforested Amazon, Sumatra, and Congo. However, while the logged plain is beginning to recover, there are ecological tipping points. The landmass known as Dump Island in the story is now a dead loss because, as one scientist explains in the novel, if more than a percentage of a forest is cut over a certain area, then the fiberweed doesn't reseed. We, like the future Terrans in the story, must attend to the fact that the forest ecology is a delicate one. If the forest perishes, its fauna may go with it. We must learn from the Afshians, whose word for world is forest. Through her powerfully imaginative stories, Le Guin warns us of how dependent we are on forests, and that our hope of survival rests upon our collective efforts to protect them. Such creative thinking and clarity of vision the fantastic imagination unlocks within us, I argue, will become ever more vital as we strive to reimagine our relationship with forests.